All right. I'm going to hand you that.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our keynote event at the Bay Area Book Festival, 8th Annual. I am Sherilyn Parsons, the founder and director, and we have with us tonight, introducing our two speakers, Kate Harrison, who is the council member for downtown Berkeley and also the vice mayor, and she will do the formal intro.
Thank you, Sherilyn. Thank you so much. I'm not used to these bright lights, so I hope I can read here. But I want to thank everyone for coming and supporting the 8th Annual Bay Area Book Festival keynote event after a 2-year hiatus. I'm really looking forward to hearing this talk, Fatherhood and Transformation, Shaka Senghor on Honesty and Healing. I'd also like to welcome our virtual audience to this live stream show, later viewers, and our podcast audience. As Sherilyn mentioned, I'm Kate Harrison, Berkeley's vice mayor and council member for this area where we are tonight. Quickly, a couple business notes. One, our main speaker will sign books after the session in the lobby outside. Book sales are provided by Pegasus, and I hope that you will consider supporting our local independent booksellers and our author. Please silence your cell phones, as always. Please wear your mask and make note of the nearest exits in the theater. And we'll open up the conversation in about 40 minutes after it begins to questions. Ushers will have cards to give you for questions, and they'll bring them to our moderator, Zach. Now I'd like to introduce the man on the stage tonight, Shaka Senghor, an author, activist, and teacher whose work addresses the interpersonal and systemic violence inflicted on Black boys and men in America. His groundbreaking work not only helps us better understand the tangible and pervasive effects of white supremacy and masculinity, it also uplifts the narratives of incarcerated people. Shaka, as you'll hear, is the father of 2 sons who are lucky to call him father. As the Chicago Tribune wrote, if you want to peer into a heart, if you want a story of brokenness and healing and fury and redemption and humanity, if you want to envision a different, better way forward, Sengkhor's letters are a beautiful place to begin. And here tonight, we are beginning and beginning again. In conversation with Shaka is Zach Norris, an abolitionist, artist, writer, organizer, and strategist. He's the author of Defund Fear, Safety Without Policing, Prisons, and Punishment. I think this is one of my favorite titles of all time, Defund Fear. Zach helped build California's first statewide network for families of incarcerated youth, which led to the effort to close 5 youth prisons in California and pass legislation to enable families to stay in contact with their loved ones and more. He's a former director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights in Oakland and co-founder of Restore Oakland. And he's also co-founded Justice for Families, working to end youth incarceration. He too is a father of 2 daughters who are also lucky to call him father. I want to say that for me, it's just so important to keep reading and listening to stories of firsthand accounts of state violence and incarceration as we navigate our own complicity in systems of power. We're working in Berkeley to end the disproportionate criminalization and incarceration of Black people. We recognize that we must not invest just in reentry services, but also preventative services, equitable education for our children, combating a health system that impacts marginalized communities, and understanding the racist history of housing policies. The criminal justice system asserts itself as a mechanism for justice for all. We know that that is simply not true. Through work like Shaka Senghor's, we can better understand the intricate predation of the criminal justice system and see the ways it must be reformed. So thank you, Shaka, for your vulnerability and your power, and thank you for your work weaving together calls to action with profound and radical honesty, vulnerability, and love. And thank you, Zach, for your incredible work. And I hand it over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We appreciate it. Shaka and I were talking backstage, and we met in 2013 at an Ella Baker Center event with Michelle Alexander and Baratunde Thurston. And I've known you but kind of from afar, you know, as an author, as an entrepreneur, as an advocate, as someone who has been affiliated with MIT and Van Jones and Scott Budnick and just doing amazing work. But I feel like through this book, I got to know you at a different level, and I'm just so grateful for that. I am really grateful for that. I I feel like this book was for me a little bit of medicine.
Mm.
It was kind of a cosmic intervention for me because we all have our struggles as parents, and I feel like this was like an affirmation for me, and so I really want to um and called into some real deep questions for me as a dad, and I was wondering if you could talk about why you chose to really focus on a book about fatherhood.
Wow. Well, first of all, it's just great to be in conversation with you,
Right.
man.
Right.
9 years later, and I've been really fortunate to watch and be a beneficiary of your incredible leadership in your work. So I just want to thank you and thank this incredible audience for
Yeah.
coming out.
Yeah.
Rock with us. Give yourself a round of applause. When I was thinking about what I wanted to write about next, it was a very, very methodical process, very protracted process. After the success of my first book, the publisher was like, "Okay, what do you got for us now?" And one, I'm such a respecter of the craft. I'm a respecter of the incredible storytellers who have spilled their truth out on the page. And so I wanted to be very intentional about what I, wrote next. And, it took some time, to really think about my experience in life, what was happening in the world. And one day it just occurred to me, I was watching my youngest son, Sengkhor, who I write about in the book. He's now 10 years old. When I started writing the book, he was 9 years old. And just sitting there with him and watching this magical child navigate life without the traumatic experience that I had. And I thought about what life would have been like for my older son had we been able to really develop a relationship as father and son. And so I kind of started tinkering around with these ideas. I mentor young men and women across the country, and it's one of the things I'm super passionate about. And when I started thinking about what I was writing, I was like, the story around Black boys specifically is really limited to these very destructive and counterproductive narratives. We hear of Black boys as America's problem to solve. And, with everything that was happening in the world with the Me Too movement, the Time's Up, I felt like the narrative of innocent boys was being mixed in with powerful men who had wreaked havoc on the world. And so I thought about my hip hop sons. I thought about my entrepreneurial sons, my tech sons, my sons that have been cast aside by society. And I realized between my two sons, one who's 30 years old and one who's 10, existed all of the sons of society. And the way that I approached this book from a letter writing standpoint was really about intimacy. How intimate, can I express what I think about the world, and what is the best mechanism to do that? And I arrived at writing letters. And so that was the way that I kind of embarked on this journey to tell these stories and share these life lessons with my sons.
Right on. I so appreciate it. Y'all can see I got like 1,000 notes here. There's like notes for me as a dad. There's notes for me as an advocate. There's notes for me just as a human being. And so I appreciate you.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said kind of triggered a question for me. You in the book you talk about when you first came out of prison, you kind of felt like you needed to be a mentor to your older son Jay, and not, and then realizing, I should have really focused on being a father. And I wonder if you could just talk about what sparked that, or just say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the audience who's first time, if this is your first time encountering my work, I was incarcerated for 19 years. I went to prison when I was 19 years old, and I had a son who hadn't been born until 6 months after I was arrested. And one of the things that happens when you're inside prison is time contracts. And, for me, being inside prison, the stories that I held on to kind of help bridge the gap between where I was and where I really wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so what happens in prison is if you get a letter, one letter can be a lifeline for a year or 2 years. You get one visit and you carry the energy of that visit with you over time. And so what happened is I began to create this narrative about who I was as a dad. Throughout my 19 years of incarceration, my dad would bring my son to see me. And he would sit him down and write letters, and they would write me letters during that time. And so I filled in the gaps of my absence with a narrative of who I thought I was as a dad through the letters that I had written. And meanwhile, I was watching a whole new legion of young boys come through prison. And I knew that more than anything in the world, I wanted to protect my son from experiencing the horrific realities that I was confronted with. And when I walked out of prison, I walked out of prison with all that baggage, all those convoluted ideas, and with a narrative that I had created that I didn't ask his permission to sign up for. And what I discovered when I came home is that approach created an immediate wedge between us. One, he was a 19-year-old young man. I was 38 with all of this trauma, all of this experience, all of this baggage, and I was dropped down into his life. And, I thought that the wisdom that I had from navigating the streets and navigating prison was something that he needed. And like many parents, I was projecting onto him my experience. And never once did I stop and just say, hey, what do you actually need from me? How do you need me to show up? And ask his permission, which I think, parenting can kind of give us this very egocentric idea that we don't ask our children what part of our journey they want to go on. And it was one of the toughest, harshest life lessons I've learned. But I'm happy that I have the wisdom to articulate it so that others can avoid it.
Yeah. I so appreciate that, Shaka. And one of the things that you write about also is just some of the pain associated with telling your story. And, I realize in asking that question, like what a gift it is just to have you on stage and to hear from you again. And I would just ask that people just affirm Shaka for being here and for writing this book and for first and foremost. But you talk about like being in the hotel rooms after righting my wrongs, and I wanted to see if I can find this quote. You probably remember it better than I would. And you talk about like having written this book and really talking about some of the most difficult things that you've been through, and having to do that day after day on stage. And I wonder what gave you the courage, and like what was the impetus that allowed you to really say, I want to do this again? Because it seemed like that wasn't necessarily the easiest experience.
That's a great question. So, what Zach is talking about, there's a chapter where I write about my experience after my first book debuted on the New York Times bestseller. And, I was invited to speak in, so many different places and spaces and with so many different people. And, especially now in times where we're trying to solve some of these social issues, a lot of times we're called upon to talk about our trauma and the traumatic events of being policed in our community, the traumatic experiences of being in prison or fighting these systems, as you well know. And what happened was that I was telling my story of my worst moment over and over and over. And then I would go back to my hotel room and I would have to sit with the emotional toll of that. And the story I told myself was that this is for the greater good. And, for anybody who's ever fought for anything of meaning, anybody who's ever fought for things that's rooted in our humanity, what we understand is that we have this narrative about the greater good and the sacrifice that we must give to shift things and to change the world. And it was really harmful, and I countered it with some very counterproductive, behaviors, reactionary things that was kind of quick fixes.
Mm,
And the thing that allowed me to embark on this new journey is actually taking ownership of that
mm,
and being able to say, you know what, I actually don't want to talk about my experience today.
mm,
I'll talk about the systemic nature of,
mm.
the prison industrial complex, but I won't insert my personal narrative in that. And being able to know that that's okay.
Yeah,
That sometimes you don't have to tell your personal story to get to the truth.
yeah,
And if that's the only way that people can empathize and be compassionate with you, then those aren't the people you want to align yourself with in the first place.
that's right.
And so now, when I think about this particular story, like I've matured emotionally, I really understand the power and importance of mental health treatment.
Mm,
I understand when it's okay to say no,
mm,
and to protect myself in those moments and to really truly honor
mm.
my own healing. So in this space, I feel like a lot more comfortable. I'm talking about my writing. I'm talking about being a dad,
Right on.
and even the difficult moments. Like I am excited about fatherhood. I'm excited
Mm,
about life. I'm excited about love, and so this book leans more into the things that are exciting to me, which is a lot easier to talk about than the things that were traumatic.
that's what's up. It reminds me of you have this metaphor where you talk about what's the name of the poet who wrote the two roads diverging.
Robert Frost.
Yeah, so you write and you're like talking about what's the name of that poem? Sorry, Shaka.
Oh man, I'm drawing. I'm
Yeah,
drawing a blank.
everybody knows this poem.
Everybody who's been tortured in the
Yeah,
literature
two
class know
roads
that.
diverge in the wood and whatever.
Yeah.
Um, the road less taken. Thank
Yeah.
you. And so Shaka's real honest. He's like, I don't like that poem.
Yeah.
And you talk about to you, it's more like a bicycle. Well, maybe I'll just if you can explain that metaphor. I think that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that poem we've all, if you've taken any, literature class or English or whatever, we've all heard that poem, and it kind of gives this either or scenario. And I think life is much more complex than that, and especially when you come from communities that are constantly fighting for space in the world. There isn't an either or scenario. There's always kind of, you have to chart your own path sometime, and especially for somebody who's system impacted, coming out of prison, I actually, kind of thought that was the way, right? I thought there was just these kind of two routes. Either you want to figure it out, you want to move on with life, you want to make things happen, and the world will welcome that, or you want to go down this other path that will lead to reincarceration. And what I found is that it's much more complex than that. The world historically has been very resistant to people who have felonies returning to society. And then when you add the complexities of being a black man with a felony returning to society who dares to dream
Yeah.
of a life beyond mediocrity, there's other roads that I had to take. There's roads I had to create and build. And the way I articulate it and express it, to my son is that, when you're riding a bicycle and you see that bicycle wheel and you see all these spokes, as you begin to pedal and move faster, they somehow seamlessly merge into one moving piece. And it's kind of what life is. Sometimes we have to tease those strands out and tease those spokes out, but keep moving forward, irregardless to, the nature of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just as you were talking about some of the choices you're making in terms of this book and what you want to talk about and what you want to share, it reminded me of that metaphor of like, I'm almost seeing you like Neo, in the Matrix. It's just like the bullets are moving slow and you're just like, okay. And you talk about a lot like about meditation and mindfulness in the book. And I wrote one, somewhere I wrote, you like the Thich Nhat Hanh from the hood. That's what that was my. So I feel like I should be on the back of this book so I can get that. But I for real was just thinking like, the wisdom that you bring in this book is just powerful. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of mindfulness and meditation, what part of how that's been important for you, how you've thought about that in relationship to being a dad as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I couldn't, really share that context without, giving a background of how, I even came to understand these words of meditation. I remember the first time I received a pamphlet and it was talking about meditation, that you can quiet and you can still the mind. I was like, what is this word? Like, what is this new way of thinking about things. But, one, I was very fortunate. I was fortunate to be literate in an environment where the average literacy rate is third grade.
Mm.
And it's something that I don't take for granted. I think about that often as I navigate the world as a writer and a thinker and a entrepreneur. And when I think about the privilege of being able to read,
Mm.
I also think about the gifts that were given to me by these incredible human beings who I met while I was incarcerated. And these were the first mentors that I ever had in my life. And these men were serving life sentences. Many of them have been in prison now over 50 years. Some of them have died in prison. A few of them have got out after serving, 4+ decades. And these were the men who gave me books.
Yeah.
These were the men who, started me on this journey as a reader. I'm a big reader, and I wouldn't be the writer I am without my love for reading. And so being at a book festival is like, it's almost like me being a kid in a candy store. I want to buy every book and talk to every author. And so y'all are really my tribe. So we can definitely make this conversational. Feel free to join in and shout it out.
Yeah.
All the things, we good people.
Yeah.
But my mentors inside, they were crafty, man. They were some very strategic thinkers because I was a rebel. I was the furthest thing from what people label as a model prisoner inside. But these guys saw something redeemable in me. And the way that they kind of, got me into reading was very strategic. Like these were master chess players and, guys who was navigating wars on the yard. And they introduced me to Donald Goins. They introduced me to Iceberg Slim, guys who were writing about pimps and hoes and drug trafficking and, the inner city of Detroit, the inner city of Oakland. And then when those books ran out, they gave me Malcolm X's autobiography. And I remember the first time reading Malcolm's autobiography and seeing the power of this man who was so disciplined intellectually. The world knows his work as a human rights advocate and a Black nationalist and a brilliant, orator. But what I was always impressed with was the personal discipline that he, utilized in his approach to educating himself in the books he read. So I started reading books Malcolm was reading, and those books led me to other books. And so by the time I got a pamphlet on meditation, even though the word was foreign to me, I was curious enough to want to know more about it. And I remember the first time that I tried to meditate, and I was actually in solitary confinement. It was 1992. I was a few months short of my 20-year birthday. And I laid on my bunk and, I was doing the breathing exercises. And all of the horrific events of my life just kind of floated through my mind like, y'all know, like the bottom screen on ESPN or CNN. And it was just like trauma after trauma and all these events. But what happened is that instead of running from it and shrinking, I was like, I gotta let it process, and I just kept practicing over and over. And I realized that I was liberating myself from these traumas that I had held deep within. And then I began to journal. And I see journaling as meditation on paper. It's the way that I see my writing. But it's processing and allowing the freedom and the clarity that comes with emptying the mind of all the impure things that we no longer can control. And, that shifted into a sense of like mindfulness and how I live my life. I'm very forgetful about what happened, yesterday or 2 weeks ago. Y'all don't believe me? Y'all can ask my girlfriend, my partner, who's in the audience. But I'm intentional with that, of emptying the mind.
Yeah.
I think we hold on to so many things that are impediments to us living in the present. And when it really hit me was from 1999 to 2004, I was in solitary confinement in a cell that's smaller than this rug that we're sitting on. And I remember the torture of trying to guess when I was going to get out or try to calculate when I was going to get out. Because the most torturous thing about solitary confinement is the lack of knowledge of when it's going to end. And it's similar to what we've all experienced with the pandemic, right? Like, remember when it first happened And they was like, in 3 weeks we'll be fine.
Mm.
And then 3 weeks happened, and we was like, what the hell?
Mm.
And they was like, about a summer, y'all will be able to put y'all Daisy Dukes on and flip-flops
Right.
and
Be at
suntan,
the
and y'all
beach.
be back at the beach. Then they was like, nope.
Mm.
And so people started to suffer. Anxiety increased, depression increased. And so it was the same experience I had in solitary with this uncertainty. And my solution for that was being present in the moment, because what I discovered is if you can get through the pain of the moment, you can come out on the other side of anything.
Mm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You talk about journaling as meditation, and you also have a chapter where you talk about writing your own narrative as being freedom. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that particular letter is to my younger son, Sengkhor. Navigating this world that we're currently in. I'm often thinking about what are the stories that have been told about us.
Mm.
What are the stories that are told to us, and how do those stories help to heal or cause deeper harm?
Mm.
And when I think about my youngest son, Sengkhor, he is truly a magical human being.
Mm.
And I know pretty much all the parents in here feel like that, or at least felt like that at some point about their children, depending on how old they are. Now they I feel the same way. And I know a bunch of parents are kind of like, here, look at this picture of my child, and feel amazed. And I've met those kids, right? I've had people drop their kids off and like, they're so amazing, and then the kid is like flipping over the couch and doing graffiti on the wall. But I think Sengkhor is truly a special, emotionally thought evolved, little human being. And I was thinking about how I parent him, and what are the stories that he gets to understand about himself as he's developing, and what is my responsibility with that. A lot of times with parenting, we're like, hey, don't go down there, and because this thing could happen, or that thing can happen, or this is the potential outcome. And it's all projection, from our childhood. It's all regurgitating stories we've heard. It's watching a news cycle and a media cycle that really creates this very one-dimensional narrative around Black boys specifically, that the only way you can make it is being an athlete or entertainer. And if you don't fall within those worlds of possibilities, your outcomes look bleak. We don't talk about that you can be a scientist, you can be an entrepreneur, you can be an investor, you can be a comedian, you can be a writer. And so as a dad, I'm like, yo, you can be all these things or none of them.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately up to you to choose what you want your story to be and what you want your life to be. And I think for me as a dad, the greatest gift, that I feel like I can impart to him is this emotional accessibility to all of who he is. And if I can do that, then I think that his life will be, full of much magic as he wants to create.
Right on. Yeah, you write in the book, I need to give you high level access to your emotions. And I just appreciated that so much. It also kind of reminded me, backstage, we were writing with the markers on the walls, right? The vice mayor did it first.
Right.
So we were like, because they signed back, just some context, everybody, all the artists signed on the wall. So, but it reminded me of the story you tell where I think your son Sengkhor was like writing with a marker on his jeans or something like that. And the affirmations that you do with him each night. So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit more about that, either of those things.
Yeah, and that's a great story to bring up, especially like how many parents do we have in here? Anybody parents? And it's all kind of parents, bonus parents, step parents, whatever, however you identify. We've all been in this space where our child walks out with two mismatched shoes, with socks that don't match, with a shirt and pants that don't coordinate. And we're like, yo, you need to put this on and fix that, et cetera. And Sengkhor's mom and I, we've opted to really like just let him be whatever that is. And one evening I just took him out shopping, get him some cool little joggers and some sneakers. And just to kind of give context, I'm a real sneakerhead. So I like all the cool kicks, and initially that's how I started off. I was just like projecting, like, oh, he's gonna have like all the Jordans and all the things. He doesn't care about any of those things. And I bought him this pair of pants, and they were relatively expensive kids, about $45 or so. And he immediately just like started tagging them and just like drawing on them. And he asked permission after he had did it. So I was like, he's really smart. He's like, Dad, is it okay if I like draw on these pants? And I just had this moment where I was like, damn, I just paid $45 for these. And then I just stopped myself and was like, you know what? Absolutely, because you have to wear them. And if that brings you joy, your joy is much more valuable than the cost of those pants that you're going to outgrow in a month or so anyway. But you'll always remember joy. You know, you may not remember those pants, but you'll remember those moments. And so, you know, I'm always just like consciously thinking about those things. And don't get me wrong, I don't always get it right. You know, sometimes it's like, yo, you need to put on those specific shoes. This is how it's going down. But I try to get it right as much as possible. And I think that's another thing that's important as a dad is like, you know, you're not always going to get the thing right. And it's okay. Especially if you're accountable for it and you recognize it. But you know, I just try to be as permissive as possible, and it's also a benefit for me as a dad. You know, and I tell parents this all the time. It is such a benefit when you just don't give a fuck. Like I promise you, like treat yourself to that as often as possible. Like, you know what? I actually don't really care about this, right? It's like it's not that deep, you know, and it's so liberating. For both the parent and the child. So I just try to not care while caring as much as possible.
You create like a lot of intimacy, I feel like, through the format of this book being told in letters. And how did you come upon that idea? Why do you think it was important to have this book be structured in that way?
Yeah, so this book is really largely inspired by my dad. You know, when we think about incarceration and we think about families of the incarcerated, oftentimes what comes to the front of our minds is the mothers who are there to support their child through their most difficult moments. For me, it was my dad. My dad was the most consistent person in my life for 19 years. And he wrote me these beautiful letters. He wrote me letters that were funny, that were insightful about what it's like to be a man, what it's like to be a husband, what it's like to be a father. You know, we argued, you know, we debated, we educated each other. And those letters were a precious gift to me, you know, as a man, you know, to have my father express his vulnerabilities, you know, to have him apologize for the times he didn't get it right. And for me to be able to write him and free him from the guilt of my incarceration and for us to grow as father and son, like the intimacy of our relationship, even now, it's different. You know, we can talk on the phone and we hang out whenever I'm in Detroit or, you know, he's fortunate enough to be out in LA. But that intimacy of our letters, when I go back, my dad was so real. You know, as I was writing this book, I was going back reading letters and I was like, wow, he was really talking about everything. He wasn't holding back, and it was a care to his writing. But I also realized I was his best friend. You know, he shared moments that, you know, dads don't talk about. You know, troubles in his marriage. He had difficulty raising my younger sister because emotionally, you know, she was torn between my mother, who told her she couldn't come live back at home with her when she was 10. And so when she went to live with my dad, she took all of that frustration out on him. And he talked about how helpless he felt as a father. And so that beauty of intention, you know, the wisdom that he imparted, you know, I felt like if I can get to that level of truth with my boys, that it'll be an addition to, you know, the great literary canon that has, you know, informed us, instructed us, You know, if you're a spiritual person and you think about, you know, the Bible is a lot of letters.
Mm.
You know, you think about Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. You know, you think about the letters of George Jackson and Angela Davis and how instructive they were and how revolutionary they were. You know, there's a level of intimacy that I think you could just get to in a letter
Mm.
that's different from if I would have wrote this as a series of essays or if I would have wrote it
Yeah.
in a linear manner. And I really hoped more than anything that if I execute storytelling in a manner that's intimate and vulnerable, that it really would unlock stuff for fathers and
Mm.
sons and the people who care about them.
Yeah.
You know, the world of crisis we're in now, I think the most important thing that I can do is to help create space for other men to emote in an honest way. When we're not allowed to be emotionally vulnerable, when we're not allowed to really articulate and express how we feel, it shows up in very destructive ways. And I think, you know, as a writer and as a dad, you know, that was my mission, is to unlock
Mm.
this cage that men have been in,
Yeah.
you know, for so many years.
And that the book did, for sure. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about, just say a little bit more about the Cage of Masculinity, or how, you know, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're living in the wildest times of, at least in my lifetime. You
Mm.
know, when I think about the narrative around manhood,
Yeah.
you know, I think that this idea of masculinity has been, I think it's been distorted by mistruths
Yeah.
about who we really are. When I think about manhood, I think about my friends. I think about the men who are in my life that I see as loving dads, that I
Mm.
see as loving friends who are thoughtful.
Mm.
You know, when I hear the word toxic masculinity, it's been so commercialized
Mm.
to the point where it almost is powerless at this point. You know, people hear it and kind of keep it moving, and I just don't think that's the way that we are going to get to the other side of what that word originally meant.
Mm.
You know, when something is so harmful, you know, to women and it's harmful to men, it's harmful to children, and it's harmful to the world.
Mm.
If we don't get to the root causes of how men landed here in the first place,
Mm.
the lack of permission we're given to cry,
Mm.
the lack of permission we're given to say, I actually hurt,
Mm.
or I'm actually sad.
Mhm.
We're given permission to be angry.
Yeah.
You know, everybody can relate to an angry man,
Yeah.
but we're not given permission to say, you know what, that actually hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
And I didn't like how that felt.
Yeah.
And so the toxicity oftentimes isn't just male culture, it's societal culture and its engagement with males.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a sensitive, thoughtful dad, you
Yeah.
know, and I think I'm a sensitive, thoughtful partner. But also like UFC fights and like to see people get punched in the face.
Mm.
I love boxing. I love
Yeah.
football. And I think that we should not have to distort who we are.
Mm.
Like that doesn't require us to not be empathetic, not be
Yeah.
compassionate,
Yeah.
not be loving and nurturing. But if we're going to get to a place of true healing where we can have real conversations, we can have real intimacy as human beings, we can have real healing, we have to create space for men to be all of who we were designed to be as human beings.
Mhm.
You know, when Sengkhor comes and crawls up in my lap and say, Dad, I need a hug, you know, it's beautiful to me. You know, it's beautiful to tussle his hair.
Mm.
You know, when he's sad, it feels great that I don't tell him to straighten it up and get it
Mhm.
together and toughen it up, that he can just be sad. Like, yo,
Mhm.
he was sad the other day. I don't know why he was sad.
Right.
I was just like, yo, what's up? He was like, Dad, I'm sad. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. I'm like, do you want to talk about it? And he was like, not right now.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? And he was like, I just want you to like sit there. And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna sit here for a little while. I got things to do, but
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm willing to be present, you
Yeah.
know, but I want you to communicate like how you feel.
Mm.
And eventually he just came and like sat on my lap and was like, he just wanted a hug. And then 10 minutes later, he was good.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, I don't remember sitting on my dad's lap. I don't remember hugs from my dad. I don't remember my dad tussling my hair or just creating space for me to just be a human being, you know, in those moments. And so, you know, for me, it's just like, I don't want to change the narrative about men. I don't want to change the narrative about Black men. I want to expand the narrative. And I wanted to include all of who we are and not just these moments that are conveniently utilized or weaponized to further alienate people who really want healing and just don't know how to ask for it.
I'm wondering if you can speak further on that, just in terms of like the challenges of being a Black father and how you've navigated that, like how that's shown up for you. And I really appreciated a number of different aspects, but rather than me talking, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, that you know, it's so interesting. Like, you know, when we're having complex conversations in America specifically right now around race and gender, and sadly, a lot of these conversations aren't the whole truth. Um, we're in a very angry space, rightfully so. A lot of the things we're seeing, you know, make us angry, and it makes people angry. We feel angry when we don't know how to solve the problems. We feel angry when we see people hurt that we can't help.
Yeah.
You know, we're angry at each other, you know, because we don't feel heard or we don't feel seen. And, you know, I have tried to navigate my life in a way that I try to counter the anger that is, you know, comes up often. I try to counter it with humor. I try to counter it with love. I try to counter it with good friends and just remind myself of, you know, the beauty of this human tapestry. But the reality is I am a Black man in America. And it happens in so many nuanced ways. Even today we were like walking through the big book festival and the guy just was like, "Oh, you look like a rapper." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "You look like an entertainer." And I was like, "That's actually racist," you know, and I just kept it moving, right? And the angry me would have been more confrontational of like, how dare you, like, you know, why I don't look like a tech exec, which I actually happen to be.
Yeah.
Why I don't look like a writer. We're at a book festival. This would be a great place to start, right? And so it's all these little indignities that you know, prick at your skin, and you think about it. And you know, I was thinking about when I was writing this, is like, how do I express what that really feels like without creating a wedge between people that I really want to reach? And I know if I only express the anger, that creates a wedge, right? Because people are like, "Oh shit, it's you know, this is a lot," right?
Yeah.
And I was like, as I was writing, I was just thinking about real lived experience, like that experience, right? And most people are like, "Oh, well, he didn't mean any harm."
Yeah.
It's harmful. Like those are just the facts, right?
Yeah.
It's not only harmful, it's disrespectful, and it's not a compliment, right? But there's a story I tell in the book when I talk about this experience I had. So a few months prior to the pandemic, I bought a home in LA. And shortly after I bought a home, you know, my son, Sengkhor, decided he wants a puppy, and we talked about that. And so we bought a puppy, and then I forgot what having a puppy is like. And like nobody like gave me the heads up, like, "Yo, bro, this is about to be a disaster," right? And so within the first weeks, the puppy is sick. It's like every time it eats something, it's pooping everywhere, and I'm just like, "Yo, this is not what I signed up for. I should have got like a bigger dog." But on one particular night, I'm laying in my bed, and I'm like, I wake up, it's like 2 a.m. I'm like smelling something, like it smells like poop. And so I'm like, did I like step in poop before I came in? 'Cause I always kick my sneakers off on the side of the bed. And I'm just like, and then I get up and I open my bedroom door and it gets like really strong. And then I remember, oh, I got a puppy, right? So puppies pooped in the crate, and I'm like, okay, let me get the puppy out. And so I take the crate out into the night, and initially I'm just like, let me put him in the other crate, rinse that one out, I'm doing a thing. And then I had this moment of like gripping anxiety where I literally freeze because I'm making so much noise. And when you're cleaning, when you calm, it's probably not as noisy as when you like pissed off.
Yeah.
So it's like pissed off, crate banging, water splashing. And I had this moment that's almost paralyzing because I'm new to this neighborhood. And it's 2:00 in the morning. And I'm back there with a hoodie and jogging pants on. And I'm thinking to myself, what if one of my neighbors called the police and said that they think there's a break-in? And I don't have my ID on me because it's in the house, it's 3 in the morning. What are the police going to say when they come to the gate and they see a black man in this affluent neighborhood with a hoodie and jogging pants on at 2:00 in the morning? And it was in that moment where I had to really draw upon my mindfulness practice and tell myself that this isn't happening right now. That this is a story that as often as we see it, it's not happening in this moment. And I shared that story because I believe that if our allies, if people that say that they want to see racial healing, if other dads that say that they want to see their white kids playing with black kids, and they want to spend time with people who are outside of their community, you have to understand that that's what racism in America looks like. Like racism in America doesn't just look like the racial slur. It doesn't just look like the times we're pulled over. It doesn't look like the times we're followed around the store. It looked like the narratives that we create when we're just doing something that every American who's ever had a dog in this country has had to do without the fear that that innocent moment can turn into a catastrophe based on the mere fact that I'm a black man in America.
Yeah. And what I love about this book is that you share this in a way that is so intimate and vulnerable and persuasive. And I want to read, is it okay if I read a paragraph? Because it reminded me what you were saying of this particular paragraph. You write, the continuous pricks at our identity are agonizing. How am I to navigate them? How are you to do so? If you don't have the mechanism to self-affirm or reimagine who such people are, for example, that they are victims of cultural ignorance inside a racist system rather than merely racist, you will find life unbearable, and we must avoid the ledge. It's exhausting to have to make your own journey peaceful at all times, to walk into a room with confidence when the entire culture is against you. That's why affirmations are so important, and that's why friends and allies are so important too, because they value you as a human being first and only. I don't know if you want to say more about that but it was powerful for me, just to think about, my own experience. I have a different experience than you being a light-skinned African-American man. I feel like I have benefited from privilege in going to schools that were predominantly African-American. So I've had to be self-reflective in different ways, but I just so appreciated like how you bring mindfulness and compassion into everything that you're sharing with your sons and sharing with all of us. So thank you for that. But any ideas or things that come up?
Yeah, I'm really a great writer. I was like, man, I was like, yo, he was writing up in that joint. No, I mean, like I truly, when I think about that, I really was thinking about my friends. I have some incredibly beautiful friends of every nationality. And, I was thinking about, when George Floyd was murdered in front of us, I thought about the friends of mine who I had to help unpack some things. And I thought about some friends that I thought I would lose along the way because some of them defaulted to well, what if he wouldn't have been doing whatever happened prior to Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck? He would still be here. And, I had to up level my own humanity to recognize that those particular friends were in a space of ignorance around what the day-to-day realities are, even though we are friends. And the first thing I had to do is just, acknowledge that I am not here, nor is it my responsibility to be your educator. But as your friend, we're gonna be honest with each other and be real with each other. And those friends were able to hold real space and to really be honest with themselves, about the things that they have taken for granted. And I had friends who, soon as they would start with I have white privilege, I would just like stop them. Like, look, we're not going to use that language to create a further divide in our conversation. Let's start with you're a human being that wants to understand. Let's start with you're a human being who has suffered as a result of seeing someone else suffer, and that you want to help with the healing in a way that's honestly leans into who you are as a human being, because all these external labels will never be more important than your humanity. And so when I was writing that part, I was thinking about those friends. And I was thinking about those friends who I know love and adore Sengkhor and who would do anything in the world to make sure he has the most incredible life experiences possible. And for me, is to understand the difference between labeling a person as a racist and recognize the culture of racism as a operating, system in America, and how that impacts all of us. To your point, being a brother that's considered light skinned, right? There's so many things that I can only imagine what you have to deal with within the culture. Have to affirm and legitimize and overexpress, right? All the things that are the trickle down effects and impacts of this racist culture. And so I really wanted to just get to that level of truth of like, our humanity is the thing that we have the most commonality around. All these other things aren't really powerful unless we give power to them, And so I was thinking about like as Sekou grows up in the world and he creates friendships of his own and he creates relationships of his own, and those relationships are diverse and complex and all the things that he has language, that really speaks to that, but that he walks into those spaces always centered in who he is. I'm in a lot of white spaces. It's the facts of America, right? It's, I'm a writer, I'm in the world of technology, in the world of nonprofits. So a lot of times I'm the only black person in the room, or one of two, or maybe three, or whatever the case may be. But I always walk in there with who I am, So I curse a lot. I drink tequila. I wear Detroit hats. I wear sneakers. But I show up fully, authentically as me because I can do all those things and still be one of the smartest people in the room, one of the most creative, one of the most engaged. And I just think that's important for, all of us to lead with all of who we are, as opposed to these things we've been limited to believe we are.
Right on. You've been in so many, like you talked about some of the spaces you've been. I'm thinking about, meeting Oprah, meeting Obama, like all of the spaces that you've been in, from tech to. I don't know if I have a question about that, but I just, it struck me that you're navigating a lot. Does it get challenging? I mean, you were just kind of speaking to, you bring yourself. Are there challenges to that, or things that strike you?
I honestly have not experienced many challenges within those relationships. What I've experienced has really been enlightening when I think about some of the people who are, some are friends, some are associates, some are like in my intimate network. What I think about is the commonality of all the people, and when they can let their guard down, when they can just like show up and be who they are, right? And I know part of it is like how I show up and how I'm like literally just I'm me, and it disarms all the pretentiousness that comes with being successful and protectiveness and all the things that I understand why they're in place. And so it's been really refreshing, like to develop some of these relationships and to have them. And the other challenges I think I learned early on is now how not to be turned into somebody's social commodity, and to ensure that I'm always honoring, one, my skill set. I think that's really important. A lot of times when you're doing system impact work, people think that it should be free. When they want to pick your brain, they think that consultation shouldn't come with an invoice. When you come and you speak on a panel, they don't want to identify you as a subject matter expert, and so they don't want to compensate you. And I think it's important to speak to that, to say, listen, my time is valuable.
Yeah.
The investment of 20 years of incarceration and the learning that came with that, navigating post incarceration for 12 years and the learning that comes with that. There's a level of expertise that I'll bring to the table that should be honored. So I've learned to honor myself very early on, and to really be intentional about when to say yes, when to say no. To be curious as well. I think that's important. I'm just as curious about people as they are about me. Like I love learning, and I'm fascinated by people's journey, no matter where they are in that journey. And I think that just showing up authentically as myself has been, one of the greatest experiences when it comes to like those relationships that people, kind of see in the public facing part of what I do. But, some people are like way cooler than people would ever give them credit for being. And I think Oprah really falls in that rank. Like Oprah is actually really cool, and really smart, really funny.
Yeah.
I actually listened to a little bit. I was telling you backstage, I hate listening to anything that I've done for a variety of reasons. But I listened back to the most recent conversation I did with Oprah, and it was just like listening to two friends talk compared to me being interviewed by her. And like that really speaks to like her human connectivity
Yeah.
when it's authentic, and that's representative of most of my relationships.
That's what's up. Yeah, one of the insights that you share, people should read the book because the insight that you share about Oprah in relationship to your story, I think was just super powerful and insightful, and still sticks with me. And I want to be mindful that folks in the audience have questions as well. But I want to ask one more question before taking questions, which is just, you've worked in so many different spaces, and technology spaces, and advocacy spaces, as an author, and you're moving so much work in different ways. And what gives you hope in terms of hope for your sons that things will be different moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's excuse me. I think part of the reason that I'm so hopeful is because I've been through so many things, and the things that I've gone through in my life, have revealed to me this deep, deep understanding of like what it truly means to be human. And I think those things show up the most in our saddest times and in our happiest times. And despite how many things is going on in the world, and we can name on any given day, we can name 100 different things that's wrong about the world. I always feel like, and I think that I always can find way more things that's right. And I think that raising Sengkhor with the energy of recognizing, like, look, things are going to go wrong in the world. Things are going to be chaotic. They're going to be crazy. They're going to be sad. You're going to lose people along the way. But every day there's an opportunity to live in joy. Every day there's an opportunity to live in purpose. In fact, he's calling right now.
Yeah, that's right.
Every day there's an opportunity to choose the greater good, over the sadness of the moment. And, what gives me hope is that, at 10 years old, I see that he navigates the world with just this beautiful energy that's intentional, like not the innocence, like we know the innocence of children when they're kind of blocked and protected, and we hide information, and he's insistent upon talking right now, and it's almost his bedtime. So we do affirmations every night at his bedtime. That's why he's calling right now. But I see something beyond just him being protected by innocence. I see that he's intentional about being thoughtful and about being caring and understanding what's really happening in the world. Like he's a little revolutionary, he's just like, hey, this thing doesn't seem quite right. We need to fix this. He's really into like voting and politics. And, I am almost indifferent given the state of politics in this world. But it's great to see that at 10 years old, he's thinking about, what does justice look like? What does it look like to ensure people have homes? Like he cares about people being housed. He cares about the quality of education and the educational experience and the school experience. He advocates for things at school when he know that it's not right. And what I love about it is it's him making these choices. Like I'm not like, hey, go and start a protest at your school, right? It's like he's like, Dad, I don't think that this is fair. And I don't think that the way that these things are being handled is correct. And, I want to do something about it. And so I just asked him questions like, okay, what do you think you should do about it? Like, what are some things and how can I support you without doing it for you, So that's what gives me hope.
Right
is seeing these kids who know that they can fight for themselves and that they should fight for themselves.
Right on. I want to give you permission. Well, first of all, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
I could fill time if you want to take the call.
Oh, yeah, it's actually.
Yeah.
No, I could just like.
You sure? Because
He'll be fine. I'll call him in a minute.
Okay. Because I'll be up here tap dancing if you need me to.
No, he'll be
Okay.
cool. I'll call him.
Okay, I'm gonna ask if you could bring up the questions.
Okay.
Yes, please. Whatever works. Okay, good.
Oops, not on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking of affirmations, I was hoping that maybe you could just speak or read those, because that was one of the parts of the book that made me cry, of several. And it starts on page 22, third paragraph from the bottom. If you would be up for reading it so everybody can hear it. Thank you.
I got that. I have that page marked too.
Okay. Okay, so every night we do our affirmations. These words ensure that you know who you are in the world before the world tries to tell you something different. We started when you were 18 months old. You were just babbling at that point, but we couldn't start early enough. And this was our house, and this was our new life, and there was never going to be enough time. 20 years I'd lost. There was no time to waste. This is what you say and what I say back. I am great. Yes, you are. I'm awesome. Totally. I'm amazing. You amaze me every day. I'm thoughtful. I see that in everything you do. I'm loving. I feel loved by you so much. I'm caring. It staggers me how much you care. I'm funny. Actually, you're hilarious. I'm smart. Everyone says it. I'm a big boy, getting bigger every day. I'm a soldier in the war for love. I'm a warrior. You will change the world. I am Sengkhor. And those are affirmations. Or you can just holler them out if I can hear you. Oh, yeah, because they're recording. They're streaming live. My bad.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Great.
Good. So, as an avid reader, I'm going to assume you've read Joyce Meyer, Battlefield of the Mind?
Joyce Meyer, which one?
Battlefield of the Mind.
I actually think I did read some of that. It doesn't have like chess pieces on the cover or something like that.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I learned from her two things. Think about what you're thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
and that hurting people hurt people.
Mm.
The other book that was very powerful, since you're an avid reader,
Yeah.
I'm checking. Resma Menakem, My Grandmother's Hands,
I haven't read that.
start tomorrow.
I
Deals
got to
with,
get through this stack of about 50 I'm behind on, but
it deals
yeah.
with trauma, and when it's unchecked, how it travels through different bodies. Intense and healing. So quick question. When you were incarcerated, you had encountered multiple people who passed on books to you for you to read and opened your mind to different things. What percentage of people that you encountered about them being classified as guilty but were really innocent?
Yeah, that's a really complex question. I actually used to work in the law library, and almost everybody that comes in is innocent. So, you know, what the truth of that is, you know, I've never thought to measure. I really only thought to be as helpful with them when it came to them appealing whatever sentence they were given. And the reason being is because I just know how damaged our system is. I do have a couple of friends who I'm very adamant that they are innocent. One was released probably about 7 years ago after he did 24 years in prison for a crime that, you know, we all know that he didn't commit, even though he served the time for. You know, so there's, you know, the reality of our judicial system is truly dysfunctional on so many different levels. And especially when you're talking about very young kids, you know, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, engaging in that system, you know, the likelihood of how they're handled really is shocking in terms of like innocence or guilt. But I've never thought to measure that. I've only thought to help. Thank you.
Hi, this has been really lovely. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for coming out.
I'm a pediatrician, and so a lot of, as you were talking about what's written in the book, and I haven't read it yet, so I will be reading it soon. How do your boys? How do they know about the book? Like, has the older one read it? And what are the discussions that you've had around it? Because I know even a 10-year-old can have thoughts, a lot of thoughts about this kind. So I'm curious to know kind of what the boys think.
Yeah, that's great. So my oldest son Jay, who's now 30 years old, he's still on the fence about whether he wants to read it or not, and I'm perfectly fine with that. You know, because one of the lessons I've learned is that you just have to let people process things in their own time. With Sengkhor, he and we're like always talking about different things, and you know, he was like one of my first readers, and I've let him read almost all the books. There's a couple of chapters he's not quite mature enough to read just yet, but he's great. Our conversations are great. You know, he's some things he find to be just like incredulous. Like I opened up the book with a story about my dad and some sneakers, and he found it so hilarious. It was like the best reaction thus far from anybody who's read my work, because he just can't believe it. And he talked to his granddad about it, so it's really funny. But you know, I'm looking forward to my oldest son reading it, and I have no emotional attachment to, you know, whether he decides to read it or not. I just knew it was important to write. So thank you for that question.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
Pretty good.
All right. So first off, I just want to say thank you for showing up here today. Thank you for your vulnerability. You know, I know that it's hard to speak in front of a bunch of people, and especially about things that are so close to the heart. So, you know, I want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Second off, so I turned 30 a week ago today, and I'm at a time in my life where I'm wanting to kind of step into that mentor role, right? Like I'm wanting to intentionally build a family, intentionally build a community. And so I was just wondering if you might be able to give me some tips on just how I might be able to get started in terms of like working with boys, young men, and you know, helping build a better masculinity, right?
Yeah. No, thank you so much. This is a great question. You know, I always tell people like start where you plant it. You know, meaning like right in your community, And what I found, especially with young boys, is that they love like when somebody older than them, like a dad or uncle, like actually listens to them and spends like intentional time that's not instructive. A lot of times with boys, we're so adamant about keeping them out of trouble that we're like, hey, don't do this thing or don't do that, or here's how you do it. And what I found with the younger guys is they love to just kick it. They love to just talk and spend time, and that really is mentoring. A lot of times we think that mentoring has to be this very one-on-one time, 30 minutes a month, and then your life is going to be amazing. And it's so much more than that. It's really just the intention of listening, them knowing that they can rely on you and count on you when they have questions about life, them being able to just tell you what's cool and what's hip and you to acknowledge their humanity. So I just say start with where you're planted. If there's a county jail that you can get into, that's always a great space. Youth detention centers, schools are always, aching for mentors to like really show up and lean in. But I just think about, because I do formal as well as kind of like informal mentoring. Like young people are always hitting me up on social media and like, okay, this is a great space to have a real conversation. And sometimes they have like real life problems and they're like, okay, can I help them? And sometimes I give them my number, sometimes they call, email. But I've kind of taken the structured idea that it has to look one way out of the equation, and I just try to show up, and as a listener more so than a speaker, and then that's when the magic happens, because they young males are yearning for that relationship with older males that really um, is outside of the scope of what we typically think of as male engagement. Outside of sports and outside of the rough and tumble, sometimes they just want to talk and be heard. That's a great space to start.
It reminded me of an insight that I had from reading your book, where I think we typically think about safety as like the absence of vulnerability. And reading your book, it made me realize that safety is actually the ability to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And like, it just came through in so many ways in the book. And just there's a I Change network that's local. The person who just asked the question, I was at something this morning where they're doing some mentorship. So we should connect. There's a local group that you might want to connect with.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, it's all good.
Hi, Shaka. We
Hey.
spoke earlier today. I'm Maureen.
Hey, Maureen, how are you?
I'm wonderful, and
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm the person that works in the schools with young people, and we work a lot with Latinx and Black young youth. And one of the comments that you made really struck me very deeply, and I'd love for you to speak to it a little bit more. And that was that to encourage emotional accessibility for all of who we are. Can you speak to that, particularly as it relates to like 7th grade, 8th grade young boys?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think about a moment in my life. I was 17 years old, and I was in the hospital because I had been shot multiple times. And I remember, the police coming in and they were just kind of like gruffly asking me questions like who shot me and all these things. And I didn't know. And so I told them that, and they basically thought I was lying. And they was like, well, that's why you're laying in the bed now, because y'all don't want to tell us who committed the crimes. My parents were there and they didn't have much to say. I don't remember them intervening, so I didn't feel protected. First of all, because I was the victim. I'm the victim, and I didn't have the language back then to understand it because, I grew up in a neighborhood where those outcomes were kind of normalized, and there was no care. There was no sense of like, hey, maybe you should get therapy or you're going to feel all these things. And so when I left the hospital, I was angry. Like I knew that emotion. I was paranoid. I didn't quite have the language for that emotion. I was afraid I couldn't express that emotion. And, it was a very volatile cocktail, to have as a young boy to hold all these complex emotions inside. And, 16 months later, I was the perpetrator of a shooting. And, the way I've explained that is like, when I was unable to cry tears, I cried bullets. And that's what we see happening in our communities when, the natural emotional process of, young boys is disrupted or limited to the only acceptable expression is our anger. And so I think we're at a critical time right now where, especially with young boys who are in 6th and 7th grade, who are navigating all the complexities of what that means, the hormonal surge, the, girls and, the fear. And I'll just say this last thing, I remember when COVID first happened and there was so much social media judgment about specifically inner city people and mostly inner city black males who weren't staying in the house, who weren't quarantining, who weren't wearing masks. And the judgment was like, don't they know what's out there? Don't they know that this, this pandemic is going to affect them? And it definitely impacted our community, more so than others. But the reality was this: is that, if you're a black boy or you're a brown boy growing up in the inner city, when you walk outside the door, you're already thinking about, you're going to get shot or you're going to get killed or you're going to get beat, you're going to get accosted. And so I think the liberation is letting boys, first of all, know that it's okay to say, you know what, I'm afraid, or that I'm sad, or that, I'm actually filled with joy right now. And to create space for the full articulation of all of these moments, that it's okay to smile, it's okay to dance, it's okay to do all the things that we're typically denied as a means of survival. And a lot of times we don't think about the fact that these things we deny ourselves, in an effort to survive because we haven't created space for boys to actually be fully emotionally evolved. And so, again, this book is an invitation. I wrote it through the lens of, being a black dad because I'm actually a black and I'm a dad. But it's centered in my humanity. It's centered in what I believe about the best of all of us and what I think is possible for all of us when we can get past whatever, impediments that we've placed in our own way and really lean into the fullness of, what it means to be a emotionally evolved human being. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Well, I get to ask that you all thank Shaka Senghor one more time. Give him your love.
We got one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you get,
Yeah, please.
So how do you overcome the stigma of, there's a triple stigma towards a young black male seeking mental health supports. And so, I mean, there's already the stigma of them being young, and so they'll be stigmatized by their peers, and they're being black, and they're being a male.
Yeah.
So how can that be overcome?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, and it really speaks to, the reason that I wrote the book is that I really want to destigmatize many of these things, but also think it's important to work in partnership with community. I was talking to it's a radio personality named Charlemagne the God. He's on like one of the biggest radio platforms in America right now. And I was telling him, I was just like, we just got to make reading cool again, because information changes how we think about life. It changes how we think about others. And I know that for young people, a cool factor really matters. A lot of times we can act like it shouldn't matter, but the reality is it does matter. Kids listen to hip hop. And so if hip hop artists are saying, we need to think about, mental health differently, like they're more likely to listen to that, and I think that, when I think about mental health, I don't think about it only as like healing from the trauma of living in America and living up under a racist system, I think of it as, any other health checkup and optimizing for better like life outcomes, and just being able to tap in. So I think the destigmatizing, us just talking about it, us having these kind of open forums. And so I want to thank the, Bay Area Book Festival for even hosting these kind of conversations, because they're integral to us shifting the narrative and expanding the narrative. So thank you for a great question, and thank you all for being such great guests and joining us for this conversation.
Right on. Y'all give it up. Thank you, Shaka.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you again. Your work has been an inspiration. Met you a decade ago, and everybody needs to go get this book. I cannot. You have one more question? I cannot say. Oh, thank you. The name of the book is, thank you for that, Letters to the Sons of Society, Shaka Senghor. Shaka is already a New York Times bestselling author, so y'all will just, help him make it that doubly true. So go. Yeah. Where can folks get the book?
Right out there in the lobby.
Right in the lobby. Are you signing?
Yeah.
And he's signing books, so you have an opportunity. I already got mine signed, so. Thank you. Please give it up again for Shaka.
All right, thank y'all so much for having me.